Welcome to the IDC European Predictions 2022. Thank you all for joining us here today. It's great to have you with us again while we go through the top predictions, navigating the winds of change in a digital-first Europe. My name is Thomas Meyer, and I'm the General Manager for Research at IDC Europe. And today, if you've seen the predictions before here in Europe, you realize some things will be the same, some things will be different. One thing that will be the same is that I will take the opportunity to ask some, hopefully, very good questions to our Chief Analyst here in Europe, Phil. Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Tom. It's great to be back in the hot seat with you today. It's awesome that you are dressed for the occasion. Looks like the pajama revolution might finally be coming to an end.
Well, I guess we have to be honest about this and say, well, the age of uncertainty is certainly still going to be with us for a while. But in these dynamic times, Phil, what are some of the things that we've got in store today?
Well, let's take into account, Tom, that 2021 was very much a year of inflection. So as we move forward, it's important to take into account all of that structural change that society has undergone, businesses as well, and in our personal lives. But also, it's an opportunity to create a new baseline to navigate these winds of change in a digital-first Europe.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to it. What we are going to do today is hopefully work with you. Tell us how you feel. Join the chat on the platform. Please pose your questions. Join the conversation. Give us your opinion, but also take it out to the world beyond the platform by using hashtag IDC Predictions 2022 and also at IDC_EMEA. Please join the conversation with all of us. Also make sure that when you see polls coming up, you would have seen the first come up already, that you please give us your feedback. We're very keen to understand how you feel about the now, the present, as well as the future. So watch out for the polls coming up. Also, there is an expo button on the left-hand side where we have put some assets, some materials, some information that you can download. It includes an infographic that summarizes the session, as well as some other materials as well. So please make sure that you click on that button. And later on, I will also point you in the direction again of the sessions button, because after the main stage, when Phil and I have gone through the predictions, you have the opportunity to talk to the analyst teams for each of the predictions in a breakout sessions lasting around half an hour, dive in deep into how they feel about the predictions and the future. Particularly, you will see in this session with Phil and myself some special guests, and some of those will also join the session, the breakout sessions as well. So
I think there's a prize for interactivity, though, Tom.
That's true. That's true. And what is the prize, Phil?
IDC report, a special IDC report.
I think we need to make it better. I think it's a session with you on any topic that the most active participant chooses.
At the beach.
At the beach, maybe over dinner. Maybe over dinner. All right. So that's great. So hopefully get active, join us. I have offered Phil. Hopefully he'll take you up on that one as well. So now, before we get into the meat of the content, let's take a look back on how we did in terms of predictions that we proposed last year.
Sure, Tom. And the answer to that is, despite all the uncertainty in 2021, we came out pretty strongly. So a solid 8 out of 10. If you look at the prediction around human experience technologies, still work to be done there, and we'll cover that today in a bit of detail. The cross-industry digital ecosystems didn't quite get to the level of scale that we expected. We think it's going to go more granular to the use case level, and we'll also cover that today. The one that we might have undercalled a bit was the trust metrics, because those have somewhat evolved to ESG metrics. Depends on how you define that, but that seems to be a lot more commonplace than 40% of the European CEOs calling those out in 2021.
Okay, thank you, Phil. I mean, not too bad overall, so that's good. obviously we're going to try to be as relevant and as accurate as we were before. Now, before we go into the present, one poll, so I'd ask you to start paying your attention to. So you see this come up, please answer the question, which of the following words most reflect what your organization needs to focus on to thrive in 2022? You see the poll coming up, please do give us your response. Now, let's go into the present and start with some of the big indicators that are governing the context that we live in.
Sure. So let's look at our European macroeconomic dashboard, Tom. And it's mixed data because on the one hand, we are seeing a return to growth in 2021 from a GDP standpoint, and that is expected to continue into 2022. However, if you look at production and volume of retail trade, it's pretty flat. The one that we're all looking at, to be honest, is inflation. It's clearly too high in 2021, and it's a big topic for a lot of the executives that we're speaking to in terms of expectations in 2022.
Yeah, that's also the number that jumped out at me. So you could call that a headwind, really, could you?
Absolutely, Tom. So the inflation is one of the headwinds that we are looking at as part of the winds of change hitting all organizations, external forces that are hitting all organizations in Europe as we move into 2022. But there are also crosswinds, which are potentially knocking an organization off course that they need to adapt to or pivot to. But the good news is that there are also tailwinds, things like pent-up consumer demand, access to the government stimulus, or digital innovation initiatives that organizations can leverage to scale and move forward in a much more digitally first orientation.
Right. But now, I mean, let's maybe just turn back. It's not the same journey for every company, right? Because you can actually take some of those wins and maybe turn them around depending on your situation and where you are on your journey.
Absolutely, Tom. So that's why what we're looking to do today is help organizations navigate these winds of change in the digital first Europe.
Okay. So the starting point then is, Phil, what is digital first? What does that mean?
Well, I'm going to give you three numbers, Tom, to answer that question. The first number, 25%. 25% of the stimulus that is coming through over the next few years is going to be heading towards digital. So that's at a societal level. The economy, digital spend is growing at 4 times GDP, up from 3 times last year. So digital economy, much more digitally first at an economy level. And then the impact. So we're seeing the number of organizations that are closing the digital ROI gap going up by 10%. So the digital first is really taking digital transformation to the next level. It means that we are expanding to society, to the economy, to the broader world that we live in, and that becomes digital first. But at an organizational level, it's all about delivering value. So moving digital from experiments, some POCs, to scale and delivering an impact on an ongoing basis off the back of that.
So if the key element is driving value in a digital first world, what we did is put a framework around this to explain this in a little bit more detail. So can you take us through that?
Absolutely, Tom. So as you saw on the previous chart, digital first also means value first. And what that means is a one-to-one correlation between business objectives and tech strategy across the core business, across customer engagements and activities, towards the ecosystem and broader society. And increasingly, it's not about just trying to do one of those things to drive that digital value. You have to do all of those things. And the more that you do it, the more that you get the exponential value that is possible as you head towards a digital first world that we need to operate in.
So I think that's clear, but it also sounds like this is a framework that you could apply anywhere in the world. Or are there elements that are unique to Europe specifically?
Well, I'll answer that question with a customer example. So this is Flowy, which is an app, a banking app, a digital banking app that was launched by an Italian bank called Mediolanum. Mm-hmm. And they are targeting this digital banking app, it's in the Italian market, to a younger population, right? So it's a new segment of customers that they're going after. And they are not just offering banking services, they're offering lifestyle services. So it's moving into new areas. They are providing some level of banking capabilities as well. But it's a different approach to how they are delivering value to their customers. And it's obviously digital first, as you can see.
So sure, that's clear again as well. But I need to poke you one more time there, though, because I'm still somewhat missing the European uniqueness in that.
True. So what they're doing is that they are incorporating sustainability startups as part of the app. And they're offering those services as white label services, and effectively putting sustainability at the heart of the business model. And if you go back to our winds of change analogy, Tom, it's basically taking ESG as a potential crosswind and turning it into a tailwind because it becomes a differentiator. Now, for those of you who want to hear more about this app and what Mediolanum are doing, Dimitrio, who's from the organization, is joining one of the breakouts with Julia, which is all focusing on the digital transformation framework for the CEO. And you can hear more from Dimitrio as part of that session.
Oh, that sounds like a great opportunity to engage there as well. Now, okay, you've ticked that box, but one other bit that's missing still is, are they making money? Is it returning value?
Well, you can see, Tom, 700,000 users in 18 months, because this was just spun up in the last 18 months in the midst of the pandemic. So it is a net new thing, 700,000 users, and they are attracting sustainability startups, other digital startups, fintechs, insurtechs as part of this super app that they are creating.
Okay, so that's clear as well. So it's making money, it's digital in nature, and obviously it's you're getting the value. But what is the key metric that CEOs are looking at to enable these kind of business models?
Well, coming back to the macroeconomic environment, Tom, the idea is to focus on return to growth in a digital first world. And so increasingly what we're seeing is a focus on digital revenue as a proportion of total revenue. So leads us to our first prediction for today, which is that 70% of CEOs of the large European organizations will be incentivized to generate at least 40% of their revenues from digital by 2025. So that's the metric, digital as a proportion of total revenue and growth off the back of that as they create this new digital business model.
Well, what I like particularly about that is that it's actually quite an aggressive incentive-based target that they're also putting forward there as well. So that's great. So if you come back then to the digital first value framework, what is the starting point for organizations on that journey?
Well, Tom, I think you will know this as well as I do, or even better than I do, because as you've seen as the leader of our research organization during the last 18 months, and before that as well, people are the starting point. So maybe I'm going to throw this back at you. People first. What have you done as the general manager of IDC European Research to keep the people engaged, safe, and empowered over this time frame?
Well, it's definitely a challenge, that's for sure. There are really three elements to this. I think the first one very much is around spending more time listening, genuinely listening, and learning, and less time talking, in all honesty, and really making sure that you understand more about the challenges that's created for everyone, and also ensuring as much as you can that everyone's well, not just physically, but also psychologically, which has been a major challenge, I think, for all of us in one way, shape, or form. The other one is really thinking about empowering everyone in the team and breaking down the silos, moving to a lot more of the shared incentives as well, to make sure that everyone actually is on this journey together and breaking down the organizational barriers, in fact. But the last, and I think also very critical point, is very much around experiences or employee experiences. And that's right from the start when you join the organization, onboarding in the virtual world has presented a challenge, for example, all the way through to training and sharing success stories and all of those wonderful things. So I think experience is critical in this game.
Yeah, it becomes the anchor point.
Absolutely.
And it empowers the employee to do things that we would never thought would be possible. Right? And so that actually links to our Future of Work prediction that has been put together by Angela Salmaron and the Future of Work squad, who will be talking about this as part of their breakout. That we're seeing a lot of investments going towards workplace transformation, actually 140 billion, with this focus on employee experience And it's not just a CHRO issue or the HR function issue. It's across the C-suite, collaboration across the C-suite. And increasingly, it is the CEO. And I think that's a good opportunity for us to hear from a CEO directly. So Simon Paris, who we've been speaking to over the last 6 to 12 months, a CEO of Finastra, who had some really interesting perspectives on the shift to people first, but how you manage these hybrid workplaces as part of that. So let's go across to Simon.
So what have we done? We've said, the offices are no longer going to be called offices. They're going to be called collaboration hubs. And we've reconfigured all of them to move away from the idea of an office to collaboration space. So where people can go and do their agile, their stand-up meetings, their whiteboarding sessions, and so on. But the idea of a young person getting onto a mass transit system to travel 2 hours into the heart of Singapore or London, sit next to somebody at a hot desk that they don't even talk to then repeat that journey at night, that is dead. I don't think we're ever going to get the young people to come to work, right? They will go to collaborate. They'll go to ideate. They'll go to cooperate. They'll go because it's part of their social network. There's always that debate, customer first or people first. And I think it's been clarified. Richard Branson was right. Put the people first and they will take care of their customers.
Yeah, I have to say the conversation with Simon, and he said a lot more beyond this as well, was absolutely tremendous. Now, people first, and then also it's the work anywhere model that's becoming the norm. So what's changing? Can you be a bit more concrete about that?
Well, it comes back to experience, Tom, because, we were speaking to another CEO about this workplace of the future, and he was saying how he had 3 E's that he looked at over the pre-pandemic timeframe, and it was starting with efficiency, then effectiveness, and then experience. And at the top of the list pre-pandemic, it was efficiency, and experience was bottom of the list. Mm-hmm. In the last 18 months, it's flipped, right? So now experience is at the forefront. And the investment is necessary to change these working models, to drive that experience in the hybrid working environment, to innovate and augment experiences using AR and VR or artificial intelligence, but also to close that skills gap, which we know is a massive headwind for organizations right now. And actually, if we look at the size of that skills gap, it's increased recently, and if we look at it as of 2020, it was nearly 3 million FTEs, that was the size of that skills gap. And it's no longer just developers, Tom. It's all about the security experts, it's the data science leads, it's the user experience leads, all of these new roles that people just can't get hold of. And the impact in terms of the business is significant. So the team have come up with a forecast of 133 billion business impact of not getting access to the right skills in 2022. So this has a tangible effect on the bottom and top line.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Phil. And in fact, we highlighted the impact on the economy and business performance in the previous predictions that we did over the last couple of years, and that skills gap impact that we're seeing. But it's not just the skills gap that's actually impacting the dramatic changes that we're seeing in terms of shortages, but it's the customer buying habits that have changed tremendously.
Exactly, Tom. So the lack of skills cuts across all range areas of the business. So if you look at customers, as the customer experience space as an example, you look at John Lewis. What they're trying to do, as you can see from the chair, the statement here, that they're trying to deal with a decade of changes in shopping habits in 1 year. So the customer journey is being completely thrown upside down, right? And so they are renovating stores on the one hand to try and create new experiences for the customer. So as an example, they've got this offering whereby you can design online through a virtual appointment. You can see the number of virtual appointments that are happening your home. And off the back of that, you can then go into the shop, pick up the furniture. You can try it for 12 months, and then you can send it back if you don't like it.
Yeah, so you do that again and again. I don't know why that model works, but yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, so you can see as this digital acceleration happens, the physical reconfiguration needs to happen in parallel. Similarly, if you look at L'Oreal, they acquired this AR startup called Modiface, which allowed them to provide this beauty as a service offering for that segment of the population that is looking at leveraging augmented reality to check what the cosmetic products look like. But now they've got to incorporate that into their stores. So the shopping habits and the way that you deal with them are completely changing that customer journey. And it means that, we call this the fizzy digital experience, and the creation of these new design innovation teams are going to be critical, because in the past you had the digital team creating the customer journey for the digital customer journey, whereas you had the people, the customer-facing staff in the stores, in the retail banking branches, whatever physical environment, creating a different customer journey. And those worlds need to come together.
You need to bring it together.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so that's what we see happening as part of these new teams and the new roles in those teams, outcomes driven with a mixture of different executives as part of those innovation teams. And it leads us to the prediction on customer experience around merging these fizzy digital experiences, and that we expect 35% of the top European enterprises to establish these fizzy digital design innovation teams.
It's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful, but a focus on differentiation and customer lifetime value as part of that. Because we know that customers in this digital first world are becoming less faithful. So you have to find ways to keep them sticky and on board.
Okay, so it's not just about convenience, it's also about faith or faithfulness. So that's one of the learnings, certainly for me here today as well. Now, that's we covered a couple of areas here as well, but one of the areas that's really been at the forefront of the discussion in the last few months has really been around supply chain. So how will that be affected?
Yeah, so we call this the domino effect of volatility and more specifically around the supply chain. I'm going to ask you a question, Tom, to kick off this one. So what do Christmas decorations and anchovies have in common?
Well, I'm thinking it's a Christmas cracker joke, but probably not. So what do they have in common?
It's something to do with Christmas. Okay. The point is that if you're not ahead of the game and you need one of those two things for Christmas, you're going to struggle, because apparently they're going to be in short supply because of the supply chain volatility that we're facing, and particularly in Italy, according to the Italian team. Yeah. So we're hearing this feedback from executives that they need to rethink the supply chain from just in time to just in case, because to deal with all of this volatility.
Yeah, that's really interesting one as well, because that was also confirmed during one of recent summits that we had, the IDC Manufacturing Summit, where one of the automotive supplier executives actually pointed out the fact that they were being paid to keep additional inventory to prevent stockouts.
Yeah, which would not have been feasible or thought of in the just-in-time world.
It was very different.
Yeah. So I think organizations are starting to rethink whether they need that specific component from Taiwan, assembled for a product in Mexico, that then gets shipped to a customer in Europe, maybe via the UK, dealing with some new Brexit regulation. All of these elements are being rethought as part of this global supply chain in terms of what actually makes sense in terms of proximity and profitable proximity.
But does that mean that it's, this has obviously been in place for a long time. Does that mean everything now gets transformed, or is what's happening there?
So it doesn't mean that globalization goes away. The global supply chains are not going to go away overnight, but what you need is visibility. And so this is the next prediction, which is real-time visibility as part of the future of operations, with the creation of these supply chain control towers. So imagine you're the captain of a ship, and you in those tricky waters because of these winds of change. You need to see where you're going, and you need real-time data to work out the course to take. But it's not just internal to your ship or to your organization. It's around all the external forces. And for the executives dealing with the decisions they have to make, they have to take into account that the external network, not just their own organization. So that's where the real-time visibility comes into play.
But I think, to be honest, to really understand that, we need a bit more detail in terms of what it means for the tech world.
True. So let's build this out in terms of the supply chain control tower. So you can see there, you're answering these questions. What has happened? what is happening, what is going to happen based on that real-time data, connecting physical and digital worlds again, so that fuzzy digital world coming through again. But it's not just in your organization, it's that multi-enterprise supply chain network. So it's going external as well. And you can see ThyssenKrupp Materials already putting this in place. This is as of October this year. And the manufacturing team has done some research on this. And they've shown that 76% of European organizations are either planning to invest or have invested in supply chain intelligence or planning technologies to provide this type of visibility.
Okay, but then I think we need to bring it up a level, maybe again from there, in order to really make sure that we understand it all. So if you get back to our digital first value framework, can you give some concrete examples that CEOs are focusing on to deliver this digital value?
Sure. So I think we need to take into account that those business objectives are evolving all the time. And so you need to get ahead of the curve here. So what we're seeing are three broad things across the board. The first one is non-tech buying tech. So you saw this with Philips acquiring some software companies to drive their digital healthcare business. You saw the fintech was acquired by Visa for nearly 2 billion euros. We talked about Modiface and L'Oreal. So there's that non-tech buying tech to accelerate the digital, the shift to digital first. Then you've got massive organic investments. It could be Carrefour in retail, Sberbank, the biggest bank in Russia, EDP, the biggest utility in Portugal, billions of euros going towards a change in the business model from the bottoms up. But what's really interesting is the changes in the technology leadership in the digital dream team, in the C-suite. So you're seeing new technology leaders being appointed, reporting into the CEO, combining IT and digital to drive scale for these digital first initiatives.
So that's really interesting. Three very strong points as well that segment that somewhat. So it cuts across all industries. I think that's definitely a learning as well. But what happens? You already spoke about the tech leadership there, but what happens in terms of the C-suite leadership?
Yeah, so this actually is reflected in our ongoing research, which we've been talking about for a number of years around the digital dream team. So the C-suite becoming the digital dream team. But what's become clear is that technology leader is the linchpin of that digital dream team. And 98% of the C-suite are saying that the CIO has done a good job over the last 18 months. But now it's the time to shine. And it could be the CIO, but it could also be the CTO, the CDO, taking on this strategic leadership role, driving the not just digital strategy, but the business strategy. And our view is that unless that role reports into the CEO, organizations will really struggle to deliver that digital value according to our framework.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. Now, you've heard from us, but it would be really good maybe to hear from one of the tech leaders that we've been speaking to, Graham from Anchovies Insurance, and hear from him how he thinks this is panning out. So can we please roll the video?
We were IT in the eyes of insurance people, which was, it's fixed my laptop. I don't feel that that's a business unit. So we created a brand called Conveyor Digital, which was responsible for, yes, laptops, yes, infrastructure, telephony systems, the digital experience for people, but also the transformational pieces. So we became one organization to try and give us an identity to break that down. So that's the first thing I sort of did, so everybody knew where they belonged. It's what we wanted our FutureScape technology to be. So I sort of pivoted a bit because we were a little bit more in tribes internally about, should we put it on cloud? Should we not put it on cloud? Well, let's have one architecture. It's a polyglot architecture. You can change workload. I don't mind if it's private cloud, hybrid, whatever, but I need to be able to shift any workload at any time. That's more rather than cloud first, it's workload first, which is a little bit of a change, but I find it's working well for us.
Thank you, Graham. Now, two things to notice there. One is Graham is both the CIO and the CTO at Anchovies Insurance.
And reports to the CEO.
And he reports to the CEO. And he makes a really good point, and maybe this is something that we really want to dive into a little bit more, Phil, because he's talking about the move from cloud first to workload first.
So absolutely, Tom, and it's a fascinating approach that he's taking, and a lot of organizations are starting to think about. Linked to your first point, though, around him being CIO and CTO, what we do see happening is the build-out of these value-generating architectures. And this is the sense of IT not be a cost center, but really contributing to the digital value that you can see here. And then it aligns very closely to those experiences, to the customer advocacy, to the value chains, to the redefinition of business value. So that's the first point. The workload first approach is off the back of this cloud platform revolution that we see happening in the market, which is fundamentally changing technology architectures. So if you can move to the next slide, what you'll see is a fascinating set of data from our cloud forecasts, which highlights the proportion of cloud platforms as a total of software spend. So back in 2016, 6 cents on the euro was going to cloud platforms as a proportion of software. As of today, that's nearly tripled to 16 cents. But heading towards 2025, it's going to hit 31 cents. 31% of software spend is going to be on cloud platforms, IaaS and PaaS. So why is all the spend going towards cloud platforms? Well, they want access to the innovation. They want access to the flexibility. They want to deliver this new digital value in accelerated timeframes. Now, as part of that, there is an understanding that you need to get this workload first model in place so that you can identify the cost, security, the performance of those workloads, the carbon footprint, as we know. Tom, I mean, we were speaking to a bank recently, and they were saying that they were going to do chargeback based on the business units, on the carbon footprint. Yep. But it links to the next one, which is also becoming a topic for those workloads: digital sovereignty. So, is this complying with emerging digital sovereignty standards?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, Phil, because I think this has become a major talking point in the last few months, and there's a lot of interest in it. But I think what we need to do is maybe just think about defining that a little bit before we talk about it a bit more.
Now, let's do that, Tom. And this is based on a batch of work that the team is doing, Duncan Brown with Carla Arend, the cloud team, really highlighting how this digital sovereignty debate is ongoing, because it's very complicated. And it's all about the control of data, infrastructure, and the processes associated with your technology architectures. And there are three things to take away from this definition. First of all, we know about data sovereignty. We know enough about data sovereignty. That was covered as part of legislation around GDPR and the free flow of non-personal data. There are still some uncertainties around transfers and portability, but it's a known entity. What's happened now is the shift from data sovereignty towards digital sovereignty, which now incorporates infrastructure, software, the processes, and the operations. And that's added another layer of uncertainty because we don't have any legislations. There are some standards that are emerging, and there are a lot of uncertainties associated with ownership, around portability, around control, around unauthorized access associated with those new parameters. The third thing, which is what a lot of organizations are asking about, is the cost, right? So this is, this could actually cost more, and this is linked to our digital sovereignty prediction that 50% of European organizations will spend 10% of their ICT budget by 2024 to cover some of the additional costs to adhere with those digital sovereignty principles that are coming through from the European Union. It's a very Europe-specific thing, right?
Well, it is indeed. And actually, on that note, I mean, so hopefully everyone would have heard of Gaia X here as well. So is that playing a role in this?
Absolutely. So Gaia X is making some of the first attempts to define the standards around digital sovereignty. A bit of work to do still. We'll come back to that because it's going to support some of the industry ecosystems that we think will become important for the digital first Europe moving forward.
Okay, that's great. So let's keep that in mind, that we're coming back to this again as well. Now, let's get back to the digital first value framework. Clearly, it's got trust very much as one of the key pillars there in terms of the value-generating architecture. So does digital sovereignty fit in there as well? It would make sense, right?
Yeah. So digital sovereignty is part of that trust module within the value generating tech architecture. But as you can imagine, the other key element there is security. Keeps coming up as it relates to our trust discussions, which I'm sure you've heard over the last few weeks, Tom.
Absolutely. And in fact, so I was moderating the CISO summit, I think only about a week ago. But it seemed very much as well that cyber resiliency was the shorter term focus. And we're looking at quite a significant increase in spend on that note in that area specifically.
Yeah, so that leads to our prediction around resiliency, that 60% of major European enterprises will have increased their annual spend in cyber resiliency by 20%. So 20% increase there to secure those digital first investments against cyber risk. And that's going to drive an additional close to 6 billion euros in new security spend in 2024. But I think we've got some live guests who are going to join us to provide some additional feedback on that, Tom.
That's right. So why don't we go to first Joel and then Duncan? So Joel, please tell us a little bit more.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Tom. So, well, part of that investment will be going towards improved monitoring tools. So the businesses really need to have access to real-time visibility and a holistic end-to-end view of the health of their security estate. And then also in technologies like automation and data analytics that are increasingly underpinned by machine learning and AI, artificial intelligence. And those technologies are, really supporting very fast detection and response to security incidents. So those are some of the technology areas that are driving, that investment to improve cyber resiliency. But all that innovation and technology aside, there's a very human factor still here, what we call the human firewall, and that remains, a major cornerstone, present and future, for a secure digital first implementation. And since we are reflecting upon the human aspect, we can also talk about the CISO. So traditionally, IT roles or security and IT roles have been down there in the basement. But that has changed and continues to change. So CISOs are now elevating into the C-suite and executive board in terms of influence and leadership, and helping companies move forward and seeing security as an enabler of cyber resiliency and trustworthiness. And so, having mentioned that point, trustworthiness, I'll pass over to Duncan now, who will talk about that element of trust.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And in fact, it's all about trust. It's hard to talk about security without talking about trust these days. And trust is very much where the CISO role is heading. So last week, Tom mentioned we had the CISO summit, and we talked a lot about the evolving role of the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, to the Chief Trust Officer. But what we were at pains to point out to our CISO community is that trust is more than security. You mentioned digital sovereignty just a moment ago, Phil, but it also includes things like sustainability considerations, ecosystem trust, so trust up and down the supply chain, employee and customer experience, obviously embedding a lot of trust those, and then ethics, of course, and we're hearing more and more about that. So the broader role of trust is really where the security specialist is heading. And they are, in order to be credible at board level, you mentioned that earlier as well, just understanding that that role of expanded scope of trust is super important.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, Joel. Thanks for being here with us live today. Now, we are very passionate as a team about the element of trust. And what we've been looking at is clearly the link here between security and trust. But there's also another area that is absolutely vital, and this is a very European area as well, when we talk about the AI ethics area.
Correct. Yeah. So AI ethics is a big part of that trust discussion that we've been having. Actually, I've got a question for you, Tom. So did you know that there's an AI regulation that is going to be coming through in Europe over the next few years?
I didn't know that.
It's in draft form.
Yes, I did know that too.
Very good. Did you know that if organizations don't comply with this draft, when the regulation becomes real, that they could lose 6% of their global revenues? That could be the fine.
So I'll be honest, I did not know about that until about 2 days ago.
Very good. So now we learned something. And the interesting thing based on the research from the team is that only 34% of European organizations have the emerging AI regulation on their radar. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of awareness building that needs to happen. And it links to the fact that we do see a need for organizations to start building a framework around AI ethics. And over the longer term, that by 2024, 50% of European organizations will use an AI ethics playbook to start to differentiate in terms of customer trust, reducing customer churn in the market. So we see 13 foundational technologies as the basis for that ethical AI playbook that was put together by Jack Vernon and Neil Ward-Dutton as part of the AI team. They'll also be talking about this as part of the breakout. And what's really interesting is that within that draft version of the regulation on AI and AI ethics within that, there are some high-risk AI systems that are deemed to be unacceptable. And it goes into the exploitative use of AI or social scoring. Those are the areas that come up. And it highlights how things like bias detection, explainability, model fairness that you can see on these foundational technologies suddenly become really important to take a look at for organizations as they not only build out this playbook, but they also think about complying to those forthcoming regulations.
So there are two sides to the coin here. So the way organizations should think about this is, one is that you're thinking about the compliance piece as a benefit, but also a business piece. Now the question is, so how can you measure those?
Yeah, so let's look at the key measures for how you deliver that value, the other side of the coin, because there's the compliance, as you say, but there's the measures. And the team have come up with this feedback in terms of the key measures that playbook might focus on: customer churn, return on innovation, reducing cost of compliance, and enhanced ecosystem trust. As you can see from AstraZeneca's AI ethics principles, they're heading in that direction. So they're one of these organizations that are starting to build the basis for this type of playbook. So there's a lot of activity, but there's a lot of awareness building that needs to happen in parallel for the broader market.
But then also it's a call to action, really, to start looking at this. So if you're an organization trying to build your path in this, then now is the time to really do that. Now, the last point here is really around thinking about the enhanced ecosystem trust. And I'm assuming that when we think about building out the future digital industry ecosystems, that trust will play a big part there as well. Absolutely, Tom. So in our definition of these industry digital ecosystems that the team have put together, it's sharing IP, it's sharing data, so open and sharing of IP and data and software or applications. And in order for those to thrive, it has to, as I said, open and shared, but trusted, because trust becomes the currency for those ecosystems. It's really inherent, isn't it? It's part of the approach. And so for a lot of organizations out there, it's not so much how well you play in the playground, but how well you play with others in the playground. Okay, so don't fight about the swings or space in the sandpit. Yeah, it depends on how many swings there are and how much space there is. Well, there's always a finite amount, I guess. But so let's swing back. Though you mentioned Gaia X earlier. We'll be coming back to this. I think this is a good point to maybe think about. What role is Gaia X playing? Is there a potential role as an enabler for these trusted ecosystems? That's where Gaia X is heading towards. So they're looking to create industry-specific data spaces for industries to allow to enable the standards, digital sovereignty standards, to support those, to allow the free transfer of data in those industry ecosystems. So Kathina X is an example of that in the automotive space. But there's work to do, Tom. Well, I mean, we've had a number of discussions as well with the Gaia X team as well. Now, it would be good to just find out how you're thinking about it. Well, my take on Gaia X, I think we're going to run a poll, if I'm not mistaken, in a second. But we want to get your feedback on Gaia X as well. But my take is that it's going to advance the conversation. It's going to take it into a constructive move forward in terms of defining standards,
and highlighting those standards to the industry. But it's an ambitious project. So there's a lot of work to be done. It's complex. You're bringing together stakeholders, and you need to orchestrate those very carefully.
Okay, so you now have Phil's opinion. What would be great is to get your opinion. So let us know. There's a poll now coming up as well. What do you think? What's your take on Gaia X? So please do let us know. And we'll share this, if we can have all the results together in the summary session later on. Certainly we'll comment on some of these aspects again as well. Now the question though is again as well, it's a bit like the earlier discussion we had. You tick some of these boxes, but then the final question is always around, so are these industry ecosystems delivering additional value?
We think so, Tom. We definitely think that these are going to be delivering some value. And basically what the team did, so Andrea Siviero and the team working on this ecosystem story, they identified the top 15 largest digital use cases in Europe out of a list of more than 340 use cases. And they looked at the ones that are ecosystem empowered and the ones that are non-ecosystem empowered. So the blue ones are ecosystem empowered in this chart of the top 15. And so you could look at something like freight management. It's critical for the ecosystem, particularly in terms of that supply chain control tower conversation we had earlier. Whereas something like advanced digital simulation, maybe not so, right? So that's the pink example. Of the top 15, 11 of those are ecosystem empowered. So, and 70% of the spend is going towards those ecosystem empowered use cases. So it leads us to the prediction that by 2023, 334 billion, which is the Danish GDP, I'm sure the Danish team will be happy to hear that, in European digital spending will be driven by these ecosystem-empowered use cases. But the key thing here, Tom, is that it is going to a granular level. We can't create these big, grand schemes around ecosystems without identifying the use case, the objective, the metrics and the outcomes that need to be delivered with those use cases. Otherwise, you'll never get to scale at any stage of the game.
Well, I think scale is another good trigger because in terms of those ecosystems, the industry ecosystems being built out, a lot of these environments will depend on, in fact, connecting the physical and the digital ones yet again, whether it's via IoT and additional levels of connectivity. But the big question, I think, for everyone here is about 5G in particular.
Absolutely. And 5G will drive some of this. And actually, 5G is going to be an enabler, but we're taking a long run up, let's call it that, because 5G connections in Europe will grow at more than 8 times through to 2025. So, accelerated growth, reaching 600 million. But 5G monetization will depend on delivering these new innovative use cases to empower those ecosystems. Okay, 3 things to take into account here based on the work that James and Alejandro and the team have been pulling together for the breakout a bit later. First of all, the initial take-up and connections around 5G was based on non-standalone 5G, so leveraging 4G base stations and add-ons to that. Where you'll see the bigger bang for the buck is based on standalone 5G, because that brings in the hyper-low latency, it brings in the network slicing that enables these innovation-oriented use cases across the hyper-connected ecosystems. And the big question is monetization, especially in this time frame as we transition from non-standalone 5G to the standalone 5G. And at the moment, it's, the playground is open in this world. You've got the telcos, you've got the hyperscalers, you've got the SIs, all working out how much edge infrastructure to build out to enable some of these use cases, how to work together potentially as part of partnerships to ensure that they capture some of the digital value. Lots of opportunity, but lots of question marks as they navigate the ecosystems to support those use cases longer term.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Now, let me dial this back again as well, because we've covered now sort of like the organization, if you want, so the internal piece, we've covered the customer piece, we covered the ecosystem piece as well. But what about the broader impact of technology on society? Because that's a big question.
It is a very, very big question, Tom. And I think this is where there's a huge opportunity for business to have an impact on society, and for technology to play a critical role within that. And we've all got a role to play as part of it. Now, I'd like to outline my personal prediction at this point for the next few years, which is that there's going to be a stronger correlation between ESG performance as compared to the stock price or market valuation of companies moving forward. And digital will be at the heart of that. What do you think, Tom?
Now, someone out there might think that is a hype, but have you got some evidence to show us for that?
Well, this is actually some interesting data that was put together by Luca in the team, the team focusing on this this datathon that we created, the graphic visualization for some of the data to support the prediction, which highlights how ESG companies, so the top 50 ESG companies based on an independent audit, so they were given AAA or AA ratings based on that audit, were outperforming the NASDAQ and the Dow, so traditional indices, over the last 12, 24 months, Tom. So that's these ESG champions are outperforming the traditional indices.
So that's really interesting. So we're seeing the impact on value, but what role does digital play in this?
Good catch. We didn't talk about digital yet. And to help me answer that question, let's bring in Rainer, who is the IT Director at Sustainability at Siemens, who can talk a little bit about what they're doing in the context of digital.
Green IT, I think that's a quite familiar topic, which is focusing on making our own services and everything which is related with, meaning data centers, meaning hardware and equipment, but as well everything which is in own operated data centers, more sustainable with renewable energy and looking into the equipment which is being purchased and refurbed at the end of their life cycle. But IT can be a huge enabler, and digitalization can be an enabler for sustainability within the company. So there is a new service offering being created out of IT through sustainability. As it all starts with transparency, knowing where to act, knowing what to do to decarbonize, it requires data, and it requires data in a reliable way at a single source, which is trustful and which can be used then for all the different various angles. Talking about, for example, sustainability annual reports, financial reportings, any kind of Green Deal regulatories which are coming along, such as taxonomy or any other upcoming topics for data in that remark. So a data cloud, a data lake solution as a central space is something what we at Siemens are currently working on, together with all of our business units and corporate sustainability. This is just one example where IT is not only spending money into sustainability, but creating business out of that as well.
Thank you, Rainer, for making the intersection between digital and sustainability. Phil, you made the point around value very well, but run us through the particular. Oh, by the way, and I should point out, Rainer is going to be part of the breakout session
with Marta.
Well. With Marta later on and the team. So thank you for that, Rainer. But can you take us through the prediction and what does that mean?
Yeah, so the prediction is that we're going to see 60 billion in spend associated with digital and sustainability by 2023. It's a significant amount. There's going to be a lot of spend in this space. And you might ask the question, where is the spend going to be focused? And there's two areas that we've picked out. And they actually align very closely with what Siemens is doing because they've got a new ESG framework called Degree. Degree is the new ESG framework. And it's by 2050, their supply chain is going to be net zero, so scope 3 emissions, that's the target. So one of the key focus areas there is the processes that he talked about. So we see a big opportunity in terms of the tracking of carbon through the processes, so business process redesign, but also then the data sharing platforms, ESG data sharing platforms, and that's where Stanium comes in. And so we're going to see a lot of focus on data management platforms as part of the next phase.
And we've got this summarized on this slide here as well. Just a little bit more in terms of what this means and what the implications are as well. And in fact, I think they're going to pick this up in the breakout again as well.
Correct. So they'll be talking about the business process redesign and then also those shared data platforms. Okay,
so that's great. So now let's go back to our wonderful digital first value framework. Now, ESG reflects the element of ecosystems and also includes an element of trust at the societal level as well, because I think what we've seen is that every one of us individually is a lot more focused around that. So this is enabled and in fact accelerated by digital delivering that additional value. But we also see another area that's delivering digital value in a disruptive fashion.
Yeah, so there's an opportunity for organizations to move from differentiating on digital to actually disrupting with digital. And so it leads to our final prediction for today, which is that 70% of European organizations will either be partnering, buying, or investing in digital native startups. So creating that disruptive digital value and delivering new levels of return on investments. Who will they be partnering with or investing in or acquiring? These are an overview of some of the digital natives that we see popping up in Europe. These are ones that have only been in business over the last 5 years. It's not exhaustive. Actually, and this is done by Jen Thompson, Simona De Bruin, and they've got a breakout on this, also welcoming Frederick Tuck to that breakout to talk about how organizations can partner with these startups and scale-ups. It's the new SMB, Tom, and it's not exhaustive, right? Because in healthcare alone, there are 6,000 startups. That's what Simona mentioned. FinTech is 93 billion in terms of market capitalization. So it's also significant value that is being delivered by these organizations.
But let me just ask you about one thing though as well, because we've seen this before somewhat. And often we had these innovation labs that sprung up a few years ago with, more or less success, one maybe diplomatically put. So is this going to be led by innovation teams alone?
No, absolutely not, Tom. This is going to be put at the heart of the organization. So here's a good quote from Herbert Diess, the Volkswagen Group CEO, talking about not creating another automotive entity focusing on innovation. This is a software culture. So actually, here's another question for you, Tom. They've got a new organization called Car IAD. It's Car.software became Car IAD. Do you know what IAD stands for?
I don't know. You please let us know.
Car I Am Digital.
Oh, wow.
So that's the organization that's going to be at the heart of every brand of the Volkswagen brands that is bringing those digital capabilities to the table. So it's a different approach. It's not innovation labs out of the side. It's digital at the heart of the organization.
But it's also meaning VW no longer being an automotive company, which is a massive change when you think about it that way.
From bottoms up, processes, business model across the board, right? And this is about moving from differentiated digital value to disruptive digital value. And that's when you start to see the exponential effect of all of these activities as you align those tech objectives, the tech strategy to the business objectives. So that leads us to
another half prediction.
Another half prediction. We're adding on the half here. So basically, coming back to the CEO prediction, if organizations start to get this right, it'll add 4 trillion euros in gross value add in Europe in that time frame by 2025, Tom.
That's the equivalent of German GDP one more time stuck on top. I mean, digital is a wonderful thing.
Well, I think it is, Tom. It's going to take us forward. It's going to create the next baseline. Because if you look at these 10 wonderful predictions that the team have put together, basically, this is the baseline to move forward in the digital-first world. These action items help organizations align the business objectives with that value-generating tech architecture. Get that right, then you deliver that digital value, potentially disruptive digital value, and then you navigate those winds of change in a digital-first Europe.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you for running us through that and answering all of my questions that I had. Yeah, all of them that I had. Now, what I would like to do at this point, while I put up the next slide already, is to say, look, let's run another poll. Let's find out how you feel about the future. After listening to the FutureScape predictions that we just ran you through there. So please do let us know. There's a poll coming up again as well. Now, before I forget, I would really like to thank the team. We will come back later on, but I would love to do this now because Erica and Julia have been working particularly closely with particularly Phil and myself, but also the rest of the analyst team for helping us out, putting all of these wonderful things together. Our marketing team, our events team, everyone's just been wonderful, as well as the design team, who felt was very last minute yet again.
As always,
Now, as we transition, you see all the breakouts. Hello, and welcome back to the main stage. I hope you enjoyed the breakout sessions and were able to get into a lot more detail with the IDC team as well as their selected guests. So we realize that we imposed on your time. We all realize clearly in this virtual world that we've been living in, there's a level of fatigue setting in. But we wanted to take the opportunity here today to, in as much of a concise format as we could, to really set you up with the key predictions for 2022 and beyond, and also allow you the opportunity to ask questions and really get into some more detail. So we had a number of the breakouts, and hopefully some eagle-eyed viewers would have seen that instead of 10, we actually have 11 prediction up there as well, including the CEO one, which I think is critical overall. But perhaps before we get into some commentary in terms of what we learned in the breakouts, I will promise to close very quickly at the end. Maybe, Phil, just talk a little bit about the team and the process that we've gone through to get us here.
Sure, Tom. Yeah, I mean, I think it's been, as always, a major learning adventure with the team. You know, we've got the 11 predictions. And in some ways, just to look at those predictions, it's pretty simple in terms of the text and the words. But to get there takes a lot of work. So, you know, as always, we've been having the squads working together over a period of 2 months. But this time, what we asked them to do is 3 things. First of all, look at the data, leverage the evidence, right? Because we have a lot of IDC data we can use, and hopefully you would have seen bits and pieces of that data. Mm-hmm. And the new thing we associated with that was the creation of new infographics. And the ESG one that we showed was the winner, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's declaring Luca the winner of the Datathon to support the FutureScape process. So some really cool stuff came through in terms of the infographics and the visualization of the data. The second one was it's got to be different or bold, right? So you've got to try and think of something that not everyone is obvious to everyone, because there are certain things that are clearly happening, mm-hmm. but other things which we should take a different spin on. So, for example, the digital sovereignty piece and the costs associated with digital sovereignty, and thinking about that workload first approach in the context of digital sovereignty. And then finally, the European specific element, because we are a unique continent, we are a unique region, and we need to highlight the differentiators. And that digital differentiation and moving that digital differentiation to digital disruption and driving that digital disruptive value is dependent on us understanding those positive and constructive differentiators and expanding on them. So, and I think the team's delivered. So I think it's a huge thank you to the teams across all the squads, every single individual. Amazing job. Really big thank you from our side, because this is never close to being anything like the session that we've been able to deliver today without all that hard work that went in over the last couple of months.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely that's absolutely true. I certainly learned a lot, again, as part of this journey. Well, thanks also goes to a lot of the conversations we had with our ecosystem partners. So Rainer and Graham, and obviously Demetrio as well, who joined one of the breakouts, Simon as well. And I mean, this is just a small selection of the many conversations that we've had, indeed. Now, one thing I would like to do, well, maybe we look at the follow-ups as well. I think what was interesting now, when I look at one of the polls, so we asked you which of the following words most reflect what your organization needs to focus on to thrive in 2022. I thought we focused a lot on trust, and that's one of the big European differentiators as well. So we talked about AI ethics, for example. We talked about it in the context of supply chain, in the context of ecosystems as well. But when we actually look at what the kind of keywords are that you've chosen here in terms of what you think will really be impactful for your organization, it's around transformation, and that's we've seen at the top of the list. It's around innovation, and it's around agility, so being able to move faster and respond and adapt more quickly. And I guess that's a learning that we've had certainly in the last 2 years as well. Yeah,
but I think, Tom, the learning journey continues, right? The learning adventure continues, and the beauty about the space that we operate in, not only is it becoming critical to society in terms of the role of technology, but there's always something new around the corner. And we picked on a few topics today, and one of them that obviously raised a lot of questions was digital sovereignty. We saw that in the chat. We asked the audience about Gaia X, and some of the feedback was quite surprising. 70% of the audience either are not aware of it or don't know how it will affect their respective organization. 70%, Tom. So it highlights the learning, the learning needs to continue. These are really important topics, really important research work streams that obviously IDC can help the industry with. But we all have to embark on that journey together in order to advance what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just staying with what is a European differentiator there as well, just looking at some of the takeaways coming through here as well. And in fact, we got some great feedback around sustainability, for example. We talked about that. We think there's a critical element here in Europe, and also in terms of driving that value. You made that point. You showed the performance of ESG stock versus the Dow and the Nasdaq as well. But its key element from the breakout session was around really you need to engage for IT with the rest of the organization. So it's not a single unit driven initiative, which also comes back to somewhat what you're reflecting around the C-suite, Phil, as well, is saying it is the dream team. It's not a single part of the organization.
Well, and that was part of the disruptive digital value discussion we had as well, right? Some really interesting other key takeaways coming through from the customer and consumer session. So Jerry's Brown session is about this blended fuzzy digital CX is enterprise mission critical. So that seems to have landed very well. Joel, with the security breakout, nobody believes that their business resiliency is very robust. Again, work to be done there. A lot of talk on digital platforms and the understanding, which is a bit scary, that we are in a trust crisis. We talked a bit about that crisis of trust. We had it on the slide as part of the security prediction. And it sounds like this is a topic that really needs to be addressed by all organizations. Hopefully, Duncan's perspective on the chief trust officer, or the CISO becoming the chief trust officer, will help with that. On the connectedness, Tom, and then I'll hand back to you, combination of 5G plus other, right? So this has come through in a lot of our conversations. Monetization is going to be dependent on 5G with AI, with IoT, with cloud, with edge. It's a combination of them that will drive that monetization, that will drive those innovative use cases across those ecosystems. So that seems to have shone through based on the breakout on connectedness.
Interesting feedback as well. So let me maybe finish on something in terms of the key takeaways that's also close to our heart as an organization, as IDC, because I think it's affecting everyone. And this is from the Future of Work team and the session. So by 2025, 35% of European workers will be working fully remote, but cultural resistance remains the biggest barrier to progress for European organizations. Success will depend on cooperation across the C-suite. So we see that theme yet again in terms of engaging everyone. And you made that point. It's not just a CHRO kind of topic. It's actually for everyone in the organization. But that working model is very likely going to change. And I think we're getting a consensus around that as well.
Some really interesting feedback from the digital sovereignty breakout from Carla, talking about demystifying digital sovereignty, which I think we all are realizing. Different schools of thought, not only in the market, but in IDC as well. So Duncan Brown, we won't mention your name. But but what's really interesting from Carla is that make it practical to understand, so that all companies are going to be impacted by this. So you need to make it to simplify it, make it clear what needs to be done. It will become a key component of RFPs moving forward, which is a big factor, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, we had the discussion. And in fact, if you haven't really dealt with it, if you haven't got your head around this yet as well, it's certainly something as an organization that you want to look at. Yeah, for sure.
I do want to pick out on the CEO session from Erica and Julia. I know that they had an interesting conversation. Hugo joined that session, Hugo Timmerman as well. So great to hear that Hugo was there with Demetria as well. So hashtags, they're way ahead of the game here. Hashtags from traditional to digital. So proactive, agile, direct to customer. So that's a big part of that new digital revenue, is direct to customer with purpose and dealing with consumer expectations. So lots of topics for the CEO to address moving forward.
All right. So on that note, I hope you found the conversation we had here today insightful. Hopefully it validated some of your thinking there as well. Maybe you found it inspirational in part as well, and certainly helpful on charting your journey for 2022 and beyond. And I guess, one thing to leave you with as well, when we asked you what is the one thing you can bring from home to the office, I was surprised actually how many people were very satisfied with the office setup. So I guess that's good news as well. But the key things people wanted to bring was coffee. I think that certainly stood out.
That gets my vote as well.
Gets your vote as well.
I think coffee at home tends to be better than the office coffee. So
well, I guess that's one. So, but where would you have your coffee? Because the next one on top of the list here is my comfy sofa.
It's
so
true.
You can relax a bit.
True. Yeah.
So, I mean, what we did, in all honesty as well, I mean, some things like playing a bit of table tennis, to break up the long virtual days. Or maybe a little bit of air hockey, certainly, just to get you into a different kind of mood.
I will just say at this point that Tom Meyer is the table tennis champion for the IDC community. So he's top of the leaderboard. If anyone wants to challenge him, you can, and if you win, then you win the dinner with me at the beach. The dinner with me at the beach moves to
table tennis
game with Tom.
I think people will stick with. I heard at least that there was a lot of activity around joining you on the beach for dinner. So with that, what I would like to do is thank you all for being here with us. Big thanks to Phil, obviously, as well. He answered all of the questions, as I mentioned earlier, as well. Thank you to all of the team. Thank you to all of you for taking time out as well. Make sure you keep your comments going. It's a conversation. I think it's a path that we all need to chart together here in Europe. It's wonderful to work with the team as always. So on that note, have a wonderful day and stay healthy, everyone.